Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Empathy in Action. It's Brooke Harlow here with another weekly podcast. And on today's episode, we're going to be discussing marginalized and vulnerable individuals in healthcare. Hugh McFarland and Allie Samman are here to help us dissect this ethical topic. So let's do it.
Well, good morning, Brooke, Hugh, and everyone else who's tuning in. It's Allie, and I'm so excited to be here today, and I'm ready to dive into this week's discussion.
What's up, y'all? I'm Hugh, and I'm super pumped to jump into this topic. So to start off, I feel like our listeners may need just a tad bit of background information of what being marginalized and vulnerable in a healthcare system is and what that means. So from the wise words of the World Health Organization, they concurred that marginalization is a continuum of social exclusion from the community, and because of that exclusion, it has provoked inequalities in resources, capabilities, and rights.
And picking back off that comment, Hugh, I feel like groups who are marginalized are subjected to implicit bias in the healthcare system, which inflicts negative patient-provider connections and a lack of quality care. Allie, do you want to elaborate more on the type of demographics and who is primarily more marginalized and more vulnerable in the healthcare realm?
Yeah, of course. So when we think about vulnerable and marginalized groups, a lot of our minds typically go towards the racial ethnic background aspect of it. However, these terms are much more inclusive than that. Some of the demographics that are predominantly associated with being socially excluded and vulnerable in healthcare are among refugees, children, women, elderly, unemployed individuals, minorities, single-parent households, drug users, individuals with disabilities, and those with a chronic illness. As you see, there is an unfortunate wide array of individuals who are seen as vulnerable in the healthcare field and are marginalized in society.
Along with what Allie said, the reason that it's important to recognize these groups is because of out of all the subgroups present in the healthcare system, marginalized populations are the most at risk for poor health outcomes and carry the greatest burden of chronic diseases, which is where most of our money goes in the healthcare system. Therefore, it's important to address these ongoing ethical issues and talk about how it has been portrayed in the public and the media.
Woo, Hugh, we are not skipping a beat. So, though it is apparent to us that due to our investigation, it was found that the media tends to promote vulnerable and marginalized research results as merely just a headline or a quick storyline with little elaboration. The media stalls to deliver any background information on the topic or context behind how these subgroups are composed. And due to all this, it has bridged a gap to how we as society might address these disparities.
Further media types such as blogs, Twitter, Instagram, and other outlets that we're all familiar with are often more informal in nature, and while this helps create a platform for diverse perspectives and civil discourse, it also prevents challenges in terms of accuracy. So misinformation and harmful narratives can take hold unchecked, especially when it comes to sensitive topics like marginalized and vulnerable groups. But with that being said, we're now going to get into some detail about our field research that we did.
Now, all of us are students here at James Madison University, so when we were discussing how to further expand upon our topic of vulnerable and marginalized individuals in healthcare, we thought it'd be very beneficial to survey our own peers, faculty, and staff here at our own university.
So I don't know about y'all, but this was part of our project that I really enjoyed, as we were able to truly interact with individuals and understand the variety of opinions surrounding this topic in healthcare.
I agree. I feel like a lot of this project kind of revolved around digging through articles and other research that other people did, and so it was this part of the project was kind of a good opportunity to close the computer, go out, touch some grass, and talk to some of our peers and what their ideas were surrounding this topic.
So some statistics following the individuals that we surveyed, we ended up surveying about 40 individuals here at our university. 96.8% of them were students, and the remaining 3.2% of them were faculty and staff.
So I found it very interesting to learn about the varying opinions of our peers. A lot of the individuals we asked also study health sciences, like all of us, so we all take a lot of the same core classes. Marginalized and vulnerable populations is a topic that is very frequently covered in the various classes that we take, so evaluating how everyone interpreted their own education was very valuable.
And when it came to our results, the majority, which was about 2/3 of the participants, argued towards the labeling of certain populations as marginalized and vulnerable in healthcare being a positive aspect, while the remaining argued the opposite. One individual voted that they were indifferent about the topic, which was pretty interesting.
And along with that, we also took quotes from each of our survey participants, which offered them an opportunity to expand on their response. And one really detailed response that we sort of took note of from an individual who does not support the use of labeling marginalized and vulnerable groups in healthcare said, in quotes, broadly identifying populations as marginalized is not bad. It highlights the disparities of our healthcare system and points out a specific need among certain populations. Telling individuals, however, that they are marginalized may enter them into a self fulfilling prophecy where they see negative health results and attribute it to their identity as a marginalized group.
I found this response very interesting as they kind of took the time to acknowledge both ends of the argument, which is something that not a lot of others took the time to do.
Another take from an individual who does support the use of labeling said, quote, I think it is good because all bodies are different, and due to the illnesses like sickle cell, which are more common in certain ethnic groups, it's important to take into consideration all people's body types and how we are all different. However, we must do this while remembering we are all people and have equal rights. This presented the argument that it could help fine tune treatment to make sure certain groups of individuals are getting the examination and treatment that they need, which is definitely a side of the argument that I hadn't really seen or a perspective that I hadn't really taken before. And so that was fascinating for me. And so now we're going to switch over to our own ideas behind this topic.
Since we've spent a lot of time elaborating and explaining the backstory behind a vulnerable and marginalized groups, as well as other viewpoints, do you guys think it's time to share our own viewpoint?
Absolutely, go for it, Brooke.
Okay, so, well, very broadly, we believe that marginalization of different populations in healthcare is a moral and ethically wrong thing. We also decided that vulnerable and marginalized populations have higher morbidity and mortality rates and numerous chronic and infectious diseases, which represents an ethical issue. Numerous studies have also condemned the systematic inequalities and inequities in access to healthcare.
And just to be transparent, while the universal right to health is not explicitly codified in any legal framework within the United States, it is an inherent principle included in multiple human rights agreements, including the World Health Organization's Constitution. So, recognizing this as a declaration of the right to equal healthcare access, we believe that fostering equality and equity in healthcare will lead to improved health outcomes for all.
So, one of the big studies that we're referencing is a study done in 2018 by, and I'm going to butcher this name so bad, O.C. Ba, among others, who found that these marginalized populations are not in this position through any fault of their own, but instead due to external sociopolitical and economic forces such as redlining and institutionalized racism, among others. Isn't that fascinating? Like, a lot of the marginalized groups mentioned earlier often get blamed for their status, but research is being done that's contradicting that.
Yeah, that really is fascinating, Allie. I think the amount of research on health disparities along with marginalized and vulnerable groups has unfortunately increased since the beginning of the 21st century. So, subjectively, I'm sure within the next decade we will uncover more findings. What about the opposition's standpoint, Hugh?
So I've been tasked with playing the devil's advocate. Well, the opposition may argue that financially speaking, the reduction of vulnerable and marginalized groups is not necessarily reasonable due to the sheer cost of having to do so.
Do you mind expanding a little bit more on that idea?
Of course, so some contend that reducing the cost of resources and care is not only not economically viable, but may also compromise the quality of healthcare being provided on top of decreasing the stability of the economy, as it is the third largest industry of the United States and contributes 17 to 18% of the U.S.'s gross domestic product.
I've also heard, Allie, that some assert that those who contribute more financially to the economy and community should receive greater benefits and easier access to healthcare.
So, more of like a meritocratic approach that hangs in the balance of an individual's financial contributions?
Exactly.
All right. Enough of the Robustos response, Hugh and everyone. Let's move into our last topic of conversation, which is how one might suggest advocating for this unethical topic and how are there ethical topic advances we can societally compromise on. Allie, do you have any innovative ways we can effectively advocate for this topic?
Absolutely, Brooke. So, first off, I think that simply spreading awareness to this topic through educating the public is essential and can help individuals understand health equity. People can't make a change to something if they're unaware of what's going on, and unfortunately, a lot of people do not recognize that this is an ongoing issue.
And I agree, Ali, that encouraging public and provider acknowledgement about marginalized and vulnerable groups in healthcare will raise awareness about these health disparities. And along with that, I also listened to a blog by a doctor with the blog title Lydia Bilodeau, where she introduced the concept of employing a diverse array of individuals in the healthcare field. And aside from that, employees being from different demographics, she also mentioned how efficient it is that each person is culturally competent in the workplace despite what ethnic background they come from.
Finally, I also do think that we as a society should sway away from the term marginalized and vulnerable due to the negative connotations associated with them. Joseph Cooper, a faculty member at UConn, voiced that there needs to be a language shift implemented. Josephs did state that the choice of words we use and the concept of how they're interpreted can perpetuate inequality and dehumanization.
Well, I think that's just about it from us today. I really enjoyed our conversation expanding the knowledge of our listeners on our topic, marginalization and vulnerability in healthcare.
I agree. I think we had some great chats today. Anything else to add before we wrap things up here, y'all?
I think that's it. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in of this week's episode of Empathy in Action, Empowering Marginalized Voices in Healthcare. We hope you'll tune in next week.